Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, let's talk about Boku no Hero Academia, chapter 193. As always, if you have not read the very latest chapter of Boku no Hero, do not watch this video, it will contain spoilers. Finally guys, we got confirmation of how exactly All For One got power. As we knew from previously in the story, All For One is incredibly old, maybe like 200 years, something along those lines, and was able to survive because of his ability to steal quirks, and clearly he stole some sort of immortality quirk, or something that gives powers like that. Again, from earlier in the story, it was suggested that All For One used to rule over Japan, and it was a little bit ambiguous as to how exactly that came about and why it seems to be a little bit different today, and I think that this chapter fills in a lot of the blanks, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. When quirks first started to emerge, it was a tumultuous time, and you had quirk users fighting against those born without quirks. All For One was in a perfect situation to gain followers because he could both take quirks and give quirks. So those born with quirks that they did not want, All For One saved them by taking their quirks. And then those quirks that he took, he could then give to people who wanted quirks, who for revenge or for whatever purpose, again, earning their loyalty as well. It was through this several hundred years ago that All For One presumably built his underworld empire. But at the same time, we have the question of what is the difference between nowadays, today's society, and back then? And I think that the biggest answer for this is the acceptance of quirks and hero society. All For One rose to power because of loyalty, because he was able to help people. But as quirks, people born with quirks became more accepting of them, and people born without quirks were less fearful of quirk users, then All For One couldn't use his abilities to take and steal quirks to gather a large following like he could. I think it's fair to say that he was left with the scraps, those who were traumatically affected by certain events in their lives, probably the vast majority, kids like Shigaraki. And probably around some point in time, his major tool in order to stay in power was his own power itself, just how formidable and evil and intimidating he was. He would attract those who are corrupted or in some way malicious, and overpower those who feared him. I also think that along with the emergence of hero society, he became a villain. Somebody who could not act in the open without facing constant threat from new people born with quirks. So being out of the limelight as well probably assisted in helping All Might and Hero Society itself overcome him. Although even at present time in the story, they have yet to fully do that. But anyway guys, obviously I think that there's probably more to the story, other details which might assist in our understanding of everything that occurred. But this was a fantastic start. One thing I do want to bring up about this though, that was kind of confusing, and I'm curious what you guys have to say in the comments section, maybe you can help me understand this a little bit better. But I was under the impression that to give somebody a quirk made them unintelligent. But apparently All For One gained a lot of power by giving people quirks. So clearly these two things do not fully add up. Maybe giving one quirk isn't all that disastrous to a person's mental health. Perhaps it's just in the case of giving multiple quirks that people turn into what is essentially a Amanomoon. But anyway guys, aside from the conversation that we got to see in this last chapter, the flashback between All For One and the first user of One For All, there wasn't too much detail about the chapter that I really felt like was discussion worthy. The only other thing from this chapter that I really want to talk about is, of course, Deku. And so as we learned in the last chapter, Deku had a hard day's training, was really tired and passed out. And through this, or the culmination of training, or something with his power or himself, he was able to tap into the connection that he has with One For All. It was this that allowed him to communicate with the very first user and see the flashback of him and All For One. And so there's a couple interesting things. First off, we got to see all of the previous users except for two, and I'm really curious why these two were not explicitly shown. I feel like there's probably some story reason behind this, but I cannot grasp, as for now, why. I also thought it was interesting how All Might appeared through the connection Deku has with his ability, but he did not appear as clear as the other users. It was stated that All Might used the very last reserves of his ability already in the fight versus All For One. So it does not have to do with him still possessing some amount of the power. The only thing that I can guess for why All Might was not clear is that he's still alive and everyone else is dead. I don't exactly know why that would be important, aside from maybe this connection having to do with the spirits or souls of the user, and All Might's soul in large part still residing in his body or something along those lines. I did think that it was very interesting just how lucid the first user was, perhaps suggesting that a big part of his existence in life is still trapped within the power, preserving him, or his spirit. I also thought that it was interesting how All Might had previously said that the vestiges of power cannot directly influence you, nor can you communicate with it. Yet in this chapter, it was definitively proven false. It suggests to me that either All Might was lying, I don't see any reason for him to lie, or that the power never attempted to act on him at all. Perhaps suggesting a more intimate relationship with Deku, or perhaps more necessity to communicate with him. But just for the sake of speculation, I want to throw an idea out here for you guys. This is, I think, already a popular theory, or a theory that other people have considered. But when we look at Deku communicating with the vestiges of power, he only does so with one previous user. The others seem separate and uninvolved. And the one was obviously the very first user, who is the brother of All For One. There's a theory out there that it's possible that Deku's father is All For One. Perhaps the reason why Deku seems to have a stronger connection with the power than All Might is because of his blood relation with the very first user. Or another way that you could potentially take this idea is that Deku is the direct descendant of the very first user. Just a thought I want to throw out there. It is a mystery, and Horikoshi even commented recently that we will eventually meet Deku's father and understand his importance. But let's go back to Deku. Another interesting aspect of what occurred in the last chapter was while Deku did appear and was able to communicate with the first user and see the other vestiges, he was not fully present. He didn't have essentially his entire body, minus his head and his hand. I also do not know why this was the case. His hand obviously is the same hand that he used to flick with from the very beginning of the story. Perhaps it suggests that it's more in tune with the power than the rest of his body, but that's my best guess. But at the end of the chapter, we can see the first user reach out and speak directly to Deku and state that he showed him this vision for a reason. And as he went to almost grasp Deku woke up, and we can see his room, and his power seems to have flared while he was asleep, destroying a large portion of his room, and we have this editor's note at the bottom of the page: a chance meeting with the first wielder. What will this phenomenon bring about within Deku? I think the straightforward assumption, guys, is that over the course of this chapter, Deku got ridiculously stronger, perhaps capable of tapping into more of the ability, or gaining some measure of greater control over it. Perhaps when the first wielder tapped Deku's hand, he transferred into Deku some amount of understanding. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that the next time that we see Deku fight, we might be surprised. The last thing that I do want to mention about this chapter that struck me as a detail included that might mean more a little bit later in the story was the presence of All For One's bodyguard. They wore some kind of helmet, so we couldn't make out their features distinctly, but to me it seems as though they were emphasized beyond the point that I would expect. I see really no reason for them to be included in the flashback unless they were in some way important in the past or maybe in present day. But yeah, I'm really curious as to what you guys think about this bodyguard. But yeah, guys, I think that there's really nothing else that I want to talk about this chapter. It seemed really straightforward to me. We got a little bit of the first wielders and All For One's backstory, and the implication that Deku has somehow enhanced his abilities. You guys know that I'm excited to see what comes of all of this. But yeah guys, as always, let me know what you thought about the chapter. Let me know if you noticed anything that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always guys, have a wonderful day.